It's time for the Minnesota American Legion Patriots podcast. We're just 5 veterans coming together to bring you the most up-to-date, accurate information on veterans issues. Here now is this week's Minnesota American Legion Patriots podcast.
Welcome to the Minnesota American Legion Patriots podcast. I'm Mike Perry. Today we have with us Eric Ahlness, the Legislative Committee Chair. And we're going to be speaking with Eric here a little bit. Eric, thanks for being with us.
My pleasure, Mike. Glad to be here. Glad to do this with you today.
Yes, exactly. Well, we tried once before, and for some reason we had a little glitch in what we were doing, but hey, we're here today again.
With practice makes perfect, right?
Yes, exactly. And of course, you can't see that background as well as we did before because it was so bright and sunshiny. Here we are in December, not too many weeks before the legislature goes into session, and that's why we wanted to talk to you now. Of course, being the Legislative Committee Chair for the Department of Minnesota American Legion, a lot of responsibility there. Tell me exactly what it is you're charged to do.
I'm really charged with helping to advocate the needs of the veterans, and specifically the American Legion, with the state legislature and also with our federal delegation.
All right. Now you have a committee set up. How many people are on your committee?
We have a small committee, but it's a very experienced and powerful committee. We have 4 people on it. We have Al Lund, who you may know him from his work with Allied Charities. So
correct.
Not only is he an experienced veteran and working with the legislature, but he's got a lot of experience with the issues with gambling and background what happens in the gambling area, more than a decade. Mm-hmm. And then we have Jackie, who's coming in from your communications committee with us, so a strong communicator, and really is the future of the American Legion, a young, really excited person, and so we're lucky to have her on it. And then I have my wife Lori Ahlness on there too, and she's not only experienced veteran, but she's also worked a lot with grants and communicated with the state legislature on grants for the Veterans Campground in Big Marine Lake, and was the president of that for about a decade. So got a real experienced team, a mix of people a little more senior and a little bit younger, so that's going to be really exciting to move forward with the legislature this year.
Then, of course, were you speaking of Christy? Yeah, Janigo.
Yeah,
she's on your,
yep,
that's
yep.
right. Okay, so with that, now that we know who the players are, we were all kind of touting the big event last year when the omnibus bill passed. Very excited about that. The fact that the veterans all came together with one cause, and that's issues for veterans. And it passed.
Yes.
First time ever.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of set the tone. Are we looking for something like that now? And I preface this because I'm thinking about the change now in the Minnesota legislature. We are now in a state that's controlled by one party, all 3 branches. And of course, will that make a difference on what happens with veterans issues?
I don't think so, and that it's important you bring that up first, because I think that's really got to be our first priority as veterans, is let's maintain the military and veterans issues in one packet. Because unfortunately in the past, and it's really it doesn't matter which party was in control, but in the past it tended to be held hostage by other issues that were maybe a little bit more political one way or the other. And whereas most times we have good bipartisan support of veterans and military issues, because the legislatures generally want to help and take care of the veterans and thank them for their service. Mm-hmm. So that is our first priority, is let's maintain the military veterans omnibus bill. So that way we get a vote by the legislature and by the governor for military and veterans issue. It's not being held hostage to other things. And I can tell you from a personal perspective too, going to the legislature when we were in the military ag committee, I learned more about animal chiropractic than I ever thought I'd need to know in my lifetime. And a lot of people probably didn't even know exists. So it'll also be nice too when we're going to the legislature, we're going to be able to sit there and talk about military and veterans things and not be sidelined by other issues. Although important for those groups, isn't really central to what we need to do in the legislature.
Well, you know, some people say it becomes concerning when there's not many veterans in the legislature anymore, and because people don't understand. Well, that puts a little bit more onus on us to really explain what it is the veterans need.
Exactly, exactly.
So what do you look for coming up in the session that starts January 3rd, by the way? That's just right around the corner. What are the plans for the American Legion and the other organizations?
Right. So the Commander's Task Force, that's the other organizations that you're referring to, 8 congressionally chartered veteran service organizations. We've been working throughout the fall to develop what our approved agenda is. And so, as we already talked about, continuing the precedence of having the Military and Veterans Omnibus Bill is the #1 focus there. And then the number 2 and 3 focus. Number 2 is we really need to do something with the Hastings Veterans Home. The buildings are very dated, the campus is spread out. The veterans need to cross a road to go have lunch every day. It just isn't a system that works. It's very outdated. And there's matching federal funds out there to really help with the project, so that's got to be one of our very top priorities, getting that done.
What are the steps that have to go through to get to that point, Eric?
Well, there's a number of things that we need to do. And first of all, we've been communicating our priorities to the members who've been elected to office. We've also shared that with Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs, and through him, then that gets fed up to the governor's office as well. And I think that, you know, and the role of our team within the American Legion and more broadly the Commander's Task Force, we can come in then with a list of what our priorities are. And as we pull that up, it helps the legislature really focus their action and spend time on what's most important. And if we, as we plan to, communicate clearly that the Hastings Veterans Home really needs to be done, I think that really helps us move forward to get that done.
So let me ask you this. Is that the most important issue right now that we're looking at going into this year's legislative session?
Yeah, as I said, we have 3 items, you know,
Okay.
Sustaining the precedence of the omnibus bill, Hastings, and the third is we'd like to get dedicated funding for the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs for suicide prevention. And the Legion has great programs with Be the One, but we need to do a lot more. And as we've talked about in our last summer convention, we need to go beyond awareness. We really have to get into how can we prevent it? How do you have those tough conversations? How do you recognize the signs that someone's not doing well? And that's where we can really work with Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs with dedicated funding over the long term, really help to drive those numbers down and, God willing, eventually not eliminate, it's probably a bad way to say, reaches zero.
So you talk about the Commander's Task Force. For those that might not know, tell us, what does that all encompass? Who's involved?
Yep. So the Minnesota Department of Veterans Affairs has convened a group of the commanders of the 8 congressionally chartered veteran service organizations: American Legion, VFW, Paralyzed Veterans, down to like Jewish war veterans. And they meet on a monthly basis, and throughout the year, it's part of it is informative, to help inform them about what the state is doing, how is the state addressing issues, going out to see what some of the nonprofits are doing and learning about what they are doing to help to address veteran homelessness or other issues important to veterans. And then it really is charged then to come up with, on an annual basis, what are the priorities amongst these organizations that they can all agree to that we need to address with the state legislature and the governor's office to help make veterans' life better and honor the commitment they served. Now the state needs to serve some of their needs.
So as you look forward, what impact can the veterans in the state of Minnesota have to help you?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and I think that is central to that issue is, And as a former member of the legislature, I mean, you get approached all the time. They get approached all the time saying, hey, this is important, let's look at this issue. And so there's lobbyists on the Hill, and there's people like me who are advocating for certain positions who are on the Hill saying what's happening. But most important is to have the people from that legislator's district approach them and say, hey, this is something important to us. This is something that's going to make the lives better of the veterans in your community. And I remember when I first started doing the legislative action when I used to work for the National Guard, I was talking with an experienced legislator, and he said, I might get 100 letters on something, but that means less than if I have 20 constituents reach out to me and say, this is important. And that's really what is, I think, most important is, let's have the grassroots effort. Let's have the veterans in the community reach out to their legislatures and let them know what's important to them and why. And then we're going to get the ear and the attention of the legislatures.
Will there be information disseminated about this, the three priorities for this year, and how will that be disseminated?
Right. So through the Commander's Task Force, the American Legion has said we'd take the lead and develop a communications tool that will make available to all of those service organizations, as well as distributing within our network. And then what we will do is, as the legislature convenes and hearings are set and different bills are introduced, we will communicate to the different district legislative leads about what's going on and how they can help, and where we really need assistance in reaching out to legislatures and asking for their support.
Well, it sounds like you've got pretty much everything just kind of going in the right direction at this time before we hit that legislative session.
Well, thank you very much. And also, this year is very interesting with more than almost $18 billion of budget surplus. It's going to create a very unique environment. And also, as you said earlier, we have one-party control of the legislature and the governor's office. So it's going to be very interesting to see when they caucus about what they're going to put for budget numbers and targets, because there's going to be a lot of money out there, but there's still going to be more people asking for it. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
I got to bring that up because before we started here, I mentioned that I was watching WCCO TV News this morning, and they had a little clip on MACV and the fact that Reggie Jackson and CCO have teamed up for an event, which by the time people hear this, it's already passed. But it was an event to help homeless veterans with information and putting them in front of the right people and everything. And I would think some time ago, I remember our governor touted the fact that on the western part of the state, they were feeling like they were getting close to being no homelessness. But now I'm sitting here thinking about what you just brought up, this big amount of money that's sitting out there. Wouldn't it be nice if we could use a good chunk of that to eradicate veterans homeless, or get it to that point where it was just so little?
Yeah. And when you're saying so little, you're talking about, as Commissioner Herkey says, functional zero.
Right.
Because there's always going to be people coming into the mix. But how can you keep that when someone comes in the mix, you identify, and they're already on a path to finding a home? So yeah, that's where we want to go. And that'd be great. I mean, there's a lot of things government can do in helping with housing and so forth. I would contend, however, that as large of a problem is we really need the landlords of Minnesota to step forward. Because as you look at it out there, there's a lot of programs that will help guarantee payments, or for the people who have multiple barriers to finding a home, there's different programs that will help hold that landlord harmless in case the person leaves or doesn't pay, or maybe causes some damage to the property. So if they become aware of what these programs are, hopefully then that they will recognize the value decision as well as the moral decision to, it's a right thing to rent to a veteran who's formerly homeless, and recognizing that they have some challenges, but you know what? Other people are helping out. They'll make sure I'm held harmless should something go awry.
Right. That brings up a point, be the one. I mean, so many people have said, what does that mean, to be the one? In your case, as legislative chair, when you think about that phrase, be the one, what does that look like to you?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I think I take it as a personal, challenge is the wrong word, but a personal commitment that as I'm talking with people, and I might just say, "Hi, how are you doing today?" "Oh, I'm doing fine." But sometimes you can tell they're not doing fine when they say that. That's just the Minnesota proper response. But really dig in and take the minute or two. That's all it really takes sometimes to say, "Are you sure you really fine? It doesn't look that way." And if things are not going fine, ask them, are you considering hurting yourself? Or when's the last time you've considered hurting yourself? Mm-hmm. And if that's and that's all it takes sometimes, but it's really hard to do. And it's really important to do, to make that personal commitment to do those things and then move forward. So, but also there's a more expansive role, which you were probably alluding to in your question, is be the one. And I think that's a challenge for me and the committee to do our level best to work with the legislature, work with any liaisons that we might have from the governor's office, and work with our fellow veteran service organizations and other members of the public to really help advocate for the needs of veterans, to really look at what are the priorities we have here and how can we get them past the past go. I mean, for example, one of our legislative priorities is giving property exemptions for disabled veterans. And that's been an issue that's been going on for a decade, if not longer. And it's passed a number of times, and each time it gets a little bit better. But there are some things that are on the table yet. What are we going to do for the widows or widowers of a veteran? Can they keep that same benefit? Prices of houses are just exploding, and the $300,000 cap just isn't enough. Let's raise it to like $400,000 and then figure out a market increase that can increase over time to make sure that these veterans aren't priced out of their home just
Right.
because they bought a lake place 50 years ago for $20,000, but now it's much more. Or pretty much any property in the Twin Cities area is rapidly approaching, if not going over, $300,000. So, or maybe they just have a nice place in greater Minnesota and the prices have gone up over time. So we need to look at something like that. We'd also like to expand that too, where it'd be more percentage based. Right now, you get up to $150,000 if you're 70% disabled, and up to $300,000 if you're 100% disabled. And we're proposing, let's make it a little more graduated. Start at 50%, which would be half of the $400,000 or $200,000, and then 60, 70, each would have a percent going up to all the way up to 100% and have that exemption. We think that's a little bit more, it's a little better way to provide the benefits for the veterans who, because of their service, they're not able to do as much, or the disability limits their ability to work or maybe do other improvements. And this way here just honors that and allows them to have a good life and home with a surety that they can stay in their home as long as they're able to.
All right, we have a couple of minutes left here. Couple of things. Discussions about, number one, gambling taxes. Number two, property taxes for veterans organization buildings. Talk to us just a little bit about
and that one here, we're kind of leaving the Veterans Commander's Task Force because we're constrained by what the missions of each organization is. So as the American Legion, we really want to address property taxes for our post homes and also gambling, because that's something that we do as part of our mission to give back to our communities or provide venues for our communities. So first of all, on the post homes or the American Legion posts you see sprinkled throughout Minnesota, one thing they provide is they provide a venue a lot of times that's an affordable rental space for people throughout the community to use. And especially for like weddings and celebrations of life, a lot of times people who have those, the Legion is the only place that they can do these things. Now, unfortunately, property taxes on a commercial property that size gets to be substantial. And as these American Legions want to continue to serve their communities and provide very affordable rates, they get squeezed. So it'd be great if we could do something where we eliminate or reduce this tax on those properties, which are really a community resource. So that's, I think, is very important to do and look at. The second thing is gambling. The Legions use gambling really, and specifically for my post at 39 North St. Paul, we want to honor military veterans, youth in the community. And so we want to take as much of that money as we can and roll back into those areas. And so the higher the tax rate is, the less we're able to get back. And what happens is it gets siphoned off, goes to the state, and then gets put in the general fund and gets put out to general programs. And there's really a good space within the community to have that nonprofit charitable effort, and reducing taxes on those profits allows us to give more money back. And I just wrote a $1,500 check to our local food bank. I mean, what better time than prior to Christmas is give money to a food bank?
Right.
And so, those kind of things is that community focus to make an immediate impact in a positive way. And that's what lowering taxes will do.
Eric, thanks for being part of our show today. We appreciate it.
Thanks much, Mike. Thank you for having me here today.
You bet. We've been talking with Eric Ahlness, the Minnesota Department of the American Legion Legislative Chair, on this Patriots podcast. When we come back next week, we'll have another guest for you. We'll talk veterans issues. Until that time, remember, be the one.